Well, thank you for joining us today virtually we are in sunny Croatia. Just enjoyed a morning of talks and presentations, including a fab one from Lisa on ransomware and kind of the vectors and prevention, I suppose, if at all. Lisa, do you want to give a brief intro to you and
Sure.
yourself?
Thank you. Well, firstly, it's absolutely glorious to be here in Croatia. It's absolutely stunning, and I need to come back. I'm Lisa Forte. I'm a partner at Red Goat Cybersecurity. We specialize in helping companies prepare for cyber attacks, essentially. And I'm here today to talk about ransomware with the amazing team here. And it's been an amazing event so far.
Thank you so much. So, from your talk that you did earlier, one of the first things that really piqued my interest was how on earth you transitioned from doing physical ransom, I suppose, and working in that space from a legal sense into like transitioning into, I suppose, cyber ransomware.
Yeah, so I worked in counter piracy operations off the coast of Somalia, which was really interesting. Kind of a I suppose a very abrupt start into the security industry. It was quite interesting though, and a lot of the principles of paying the ransom when a ship was hijacked are the same as when a company is hijacked with ransomware. And then I transitioned into the police, and then eventually set up my own company, Red Goat Cybersecurity, and now I'm here talking to you. So it's been an interesting career path, definitely.
Yes, and hopefully all worked out for the best.
Yes, aged a few years, but definitely.
Absolutely. And in the case of, the topic that we're talking about most today, which is ransomware, obviously in the themes of the conversation that we had earlier, it's all been based around, not if, but when. Something that I've been thinking about more recently is what's next. So we're in this phase of ransomware and it being very, very prevalent, especially with the more recent attacks. What do you think could come next in terms of, is it going to be more widespread ransomware? Are we going to move to a different tactic? Because they can't continue on this same kind of vector forever, right?
I think at the moment, the reason we haven't seen a lot of innovation in the ransomware space is because they haven't had to. The tactics are still working, and they have been for a while. So when people say, well, why are they not evolving? There's no drive to evolve at the moment. I think we are seeing some progression there, though. For example, some of their tactics in terms of targeting supply chains has been increased. So they're going after key suppliers. There have been a number of situations where we've had serious supply chain consequences, where they've knocked out a lot of companies from one attack. So I think that's a tactic we're likely to see a lot more of. And I think we're also likely to see a lot more collaboration between ransomware groups and hacktivist groups. And as the geopolitics of the world is kind of turbulent, I think that's likely to become worse and worse as a problem. And hacktivists tend to be incredibly skilled, which causes a lot of problems for us.
Yeah. And so when businesses are hit, we talk about it normally being infiltration through a very kind of unsophisticated method, phishing, social engineering, leveraging even direct contact with somebody to try and get them, into places. And even in some cases, people getting jobs for the pure purpose of trying to get something out of that company. When businesses are looking to tackle this, do you feel that there are kind of key things that people are missing at the moment? We talked about previously backups not being a solution and things like that. Is there kind of some general points that businesses are missing or maybe are naive to at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas that I think we are weak. I think threat intelligence is one of them. I don't think we have a sufficient investment in threat intelligence, and I don't feel that a lot of companies are utilizing it effectively, because it's one thing to have it, you've got to do something with it to actually make a difference. I also think that by and large, companies are really unprepared. And I think the reason that the impact is so great from a lot of these attacks is because actually they hit and you don't have a plan for how you're going to restore services. You don't have a communications plan. So it's also really important that you focus on defense and stopping them getting in, but also at the same time, assuming, okay, let's assume they are going to get in. What do we do then? And those two things have to go together if you're going to be resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well in this space, we talked about the fact that the UK is so much more likely to potentially pay a ransom and also to be hit because of that. Do you think that's because historically we've just had a kind of very lax approach to cyber? Is it because we don't respond as well and don't do business continuity planning as well? Is it a combination of things? Why would we be so much more likely to pay than, say, the US or another European country? Is it just our culture?
I think there's a bit of a cultural perspective in that. And as I work around the world, there are some cultures that are vehemently just against it. And they almost don't care what the consequences of not paying the ransom are. They just will never pay. Whereas other cultures are more amenable to that in certain situations. I think the thing to remember, though, instead of sort of vilifying the fact that someone has paid, I think the key thing to remember is it's a business decision. And when you're in the position where you're facing whether or not to pay a ransom, you're faced with two really bad decisions. There are no good options left on the table at that point. You have pay the ransom and potentially save that data from being published, but you've paid the criminals, or don't pay and that data will be public. So you don't have a good option. So I think there's an element of understanding and kindness that has to be shown to these organizations, because when you're facing that decision, your board, your execs, that's possibly one of the hardest decisions they're ever going to have to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your talk, we kind of crossed the discussion the fact that police are not necessarily the, I suppose, end all of these types of attacks, and that really is kind of bringing into the private sector. Obviously, there's a lot of cyber consultancies like yourself, like RiverSafe, that work in different ways to support businesses that are, trying to prevent these, and also, in the midst of it and resolving them in future. But do you think that there'll be kind of new niches in the private sector that might pop up to, I suppose, prevent or support in different ways to prevent, I suppose, the spread of ransomware?
I think we might see some more collaboration between companies, that work in different areas of the private sector in terms of cybersecurity. I think that would be very positive. Yeah. I think the key to remember about law enforcement with cybersecurity is, if you imagine if you go and rob a bank, when you show up at that bank, you're on CCTV, your cell phone is pinging cell phone towers, you might leave DNA evidence behind, there are witnesses who can attest to what you look like potentially, or your voice. The police have a ton of different lines of inquiry that they can pursue. With ransomware attacks, it's just not the case. You don't have any of those anymore. So it's far more difficult, not to mention the fact that, working collaboratively just within one country is hard enough, let alone internationally across the entire globe. So it very much, the whole circumstance really plays into their advantage, which is why I think the private sector is where the fight really is going to be focused, because I think we are able to collaborate in a way that law enforcement and governments just can't.
Yeah. And do you think that realistically ransomware is creating too big of an industry around it? So in your talk, you spoke about, the insurers, the negotiators, even just the advisors that work in this space. Do you think that outside of obviously the criminal enterprises that are doing these ransomware attacks, is there actually now a pylon almost supporting them in doing it? Because we've got this whole industry now of people that consult, advise, negotiate, and ultimately pay them based on, some kind of scoring, etc., of how trustworthy they are.
It's a very interesting question, actually, because in a sense, there is like this slightly symbiotic relationship in cybersecurity, in the sense that actually none of us would have jobs if hackers didn't exist. If cybercrime wasn't a thing, none of us would have jobs. So in that respect, there is this sort of kind of coexisting situation. But I think with ransomware in particular, there's a whole industry around paying the ransom. It's not necessarily about defense or about resilience. It's about actually just paying and facilitating that payment. And there's a whole industry around that, which wouldn't exist if you couldn't pay the ransom. So you're right, there is a bit of this kind of symbiotic relationship that does exist, which isn't ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose for my final kind of question here is, do you think that there should be more onus on crypto providers and crypto marketplaces and people that work in that space to either identify or help kind of um, talk about who is maybe I suppose, doing money laundering in them, or leveraging their platforms, because often they'll ask for ID checks and such, but obviously that isn't enough.
Yeah.
But could they do more, and should they do more?
I think it's a very difficult situation. The cryptocurrency situation, I think the horse has bolted from a government regulation perspective. We've been far too slow to regulate them. The problem you have with cryptocurrency is that the whole sort of raison d'etre of it is to facilitate kind of a decentralized financial system that's outside of traditional finance, outside of the control of the banks and the regulators, and to afford people privacy. And both of those are very honorable purposes if everybody using them was honorable, right? But this is where the problem is. And we see the same problem with encryption. People using encrypted chats, that's great. It affords you privacy, that's brilliant. You and I can send messages with cat photos and no one can see them. The downside of that is that criminals can also hide their criminal activity in that privacy. And that's the problem we have in society. So cryptocurrency platforms, I think we don't want to vilify the whole industry of cryptocurrency, but the way it's structured does enable criminals to use, money launder at scale. Like I said, there's been heists of billions that the money's just disappeared. And we just can't have that in our society, because the problem you have is that these groups that your company, my company, every company is up against are now incredibly well financed.
Yeah.
And that leaves us at a massive disadvantage.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose that's quite an extended conversation about a couple of the key themes of the great talk that Lisa has done for us today. But any closing thoughts for the viewers, I suppose, at home?
I think the key takeaways from my perspective, at least, are when you see attacks happen, go and use the threat intelligence, go and invest, go and have conversations with companies like yourselves, or if you're looking at resilience, companies like RedGoat, and talk about how you can actually avoid that situation that you've just seen play out. Don't ignore it and think that won't happen to me because we've got this amazing system that's going to prevent it. Go and start taking action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that's probably the key message for everyone at home, is that, proactivity is the best defense, and that ultimately it's not a if, it is now a when type of conversation. And so, it's about being cognizant, and I suppose as proactive and as diligent in your research and knowledge as possible.
Definitely.
Well, thank you
for
so much for coming. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And I hope those at home viewing this get some value from the conversations that we've had. And should you want to know more, please feel free to reach out to myself. Or if you'd like to hear more about Lisa's thoughts on ransomware and also other conversations in this space, please get in touch with RedGoat, and she'll probably do just as fabulous talk for you.
Thank you.